For centuries, theirs has been a rivalry based on discord. Two nations bound together by a history of conflict. But today the battlefield has given way to the rugby pitch. England and France. The greatest of adversaries. When England and France take to the rugby pitch, history is never far away. It's a contest which dates back more than a century, and whilst the players change, the emotions stay the same.
Games between France and England will always be different from other games.
It's almost like it doesn't really matter what you've done before, it's almost like a clean slate.
It's always the same in that match. It's the match that really motivates us.
The one side you don't want to lose against.
There's something about them I just don't like. But that's what also makes them strong. That self-confidence, telling everyone they're going to win. It's that arrogance on the pitch.
The French view us as arrogant, everyone views us as arrogant. We view the French as being slightly odd, so it just all adds up.
Winning is everything, losing unthinkable. It's the most important game of rugby either side will play.
There will always be so much intensity and tension around the game, because we are the two biggest teams in the Northern Hemisphere.
I think it goes back, you know, a long time, probably pre-rugby and all the battles, you know, hundreds of years ago.
Having been introduced to rugby union by the English in the late 19th century, France hosted the first game between the two nations in 1906 at the Parc des Princes in Paris.
England go over, and of course they've been playing international rugby for 35 years by then, and France are well beaten. But the French are diffident. They know that they're very much the pupils here. They lose the first 11 games. And some of those defeats are very heavy ones. They're well beaten in their first visit to Twickenham in 1911, 37-0.
France had joined the Home Nations Championship in 1910, but their first victory over England came 17 years later. But post-war, they became genuine rivals.
They've been building up. 1951, they win at Twickenham for the first time. That's a significant milestone for them. There are draws in 59, 60 and 61. England actually share the title with France in 1960. The two sides are unbeaten. And it's really from there that the rivalry between the sides intensifies. They're the best two sides in the championship at that time.
France continued to improve, establishing themselves as a leading nation in Northern Hemisphere rugby throughout the 70s and into the 80s.
We won so many Grand Slams, and a lot of them with some brilliant rugby. That's where the legend of French flair was born, where we saw some fantastic tries created by the French team.
If the French get it right, it's very difficult to stop them, because they'll take you on up front, then they'll do the damage, then they'll let the backs sort of finish you off with the sort of pace that they had outside.
England began the decade well, winning the Grand Slam in 1980. But the following year, France came to Twickenham, looking to secure a Grand Slam of their own.
France were coming off the back of two painful years in the Five Nations. Well, they hadn't really been at their best. So to go and beat England, in England, to win the Grand Slam, for us it was sheer joy.
Although defeat a year later meant England claimed back-to-back victories in France, it was Les Bleus who would dominate for the rest of the decade.
Between 81 and around 88, we only won 2 Grand Slams, but it could well have been more. It was truly a great time for French rugby. especially when we played against England.
You had the Philippe Sellers and the Serge Blancos and the Patrick Legisquets of this world.
It was an exceptionally gifted generation, and especially one which wanted to experience something together. I think that's what made us strong, that great solidarity that we had.
France finished the 80s with 6 Five Nations Championships and 2 Grand Slams. They were also runners-up to New Zealand in the inaugural Rugby World Cup. In March 1991, France arrived at Twickenham to take on an improved England side in the final game of the Five Nations. Both had beaten everyone else. This was the Grand Slam decider.
You always get asked the question, what was the biggest game you played in? And in many respects, I often say that England-France game was it.
It was an exceptional game in London, at Twickenham, where the French were playing for a Grand Slam.
In a thrilling match, one moment stood out.
Seller and Blanco start running and you're just chasing shadows, really.
Cambra-Berra's recovered it, sees the man galloping up. It's Saint-André, it depends on the bounce, and he's under the post. One of the most sensational tries Twickenham's ever seen.
Despite Saint-André's try, England secured a 2-point win, thanks to Rory Underwood and the boot of Simon Hodgkinson.
We lost, but we lost in a first-rate game. One with lots of skill, attractive play, and one where the Twickenham crowd really enjoyed, really appreciated the game, and the great confrontation that they'd seen between England and France.
The scenes at the end of the game and the crowd pouring onto the pitch, I think it was, it was just an amazing experience to have won a Grand Slam.
7 months later, for the first time in history, England and France would compete in a World Cup match.
It was a very aggressive game, a war, maybe the most difficult game that we ever played.
They were just littered with little sideshows, the psychological ones before the game, the historical ones.
Blanco's punch on Nigel Heslop.
I mean, these games were epically violent as well, so it concentrated your mind.
They were very aggressive, and also the refereeing that day was terrible.
As the French struggled to keep their control, England took advantage. Tries from Underwood and Carling sealed a momentous 19-10 victory in Paris.
We came under enormous pressure during the game, but we held out, and it was, again, ranks up there with, one of the best wins that England team in that era had.
It was my last game for France, and to leave the international scene, having lost in a quarter-final, left a feeling of great disappointment.
England would eventually lose to Australia in the final, but they'd sustained their winning streak over France. The following year in the Five Nations, French indiscipline would again be a key factor.
It's always been particular games, where I think the Anglo-Saxon mentality is to get at the French every time.
We certainly had one or two people like Brian Moore and others who were quite happy to have a bit of a psychological warfare with the French.
I wouldn't say that they were the ones that involved the best quality rugby, either by us or in opposition terms, but they were certainly the ones that had a frisson to them always.
Grégoire Lescoubet was the first Frenchman to be dismissed.
The ruck went over the top of me. I got an almighty smack on the head, and Brian Moore just looked at me and said, "Stay down, base, so we can get this booger off." And he was right, off he went.
Vincent Mascato followed shortly after.
That England team had one over on that French group, mainly mentally, I think. I think psychologically we were very strong.
While the French were rebuilding, they had a generation coming into maturity, like Carling, the captain. But there were others like Brian Moore, who was a real force in the English engine room.
We just had a really good battle for probably 8 years at Twickenham and in the old Parc des Princes in Paris.
The opening of the Channel Tunnel saw links between the two nations improved off the field. And in 1995, the World Cup in South Africa saw new bridges being built between their rugby teams in the days leading up to their third-place playoff match.
We ended up staying and having a couple of good nights with the French in Pretoria before the game. Now, that probably had an impact on the game as well, but it sort of broke the ice a little bit and maybe changed things for the future.
I think a few barriers were broken down. Whether it was good actually for England or not, I don't know. Maybe we were a little bit too friendly with them.
And it was an average game. We didn't play very well. The French did play well.
Draws a line under what's been an interesting and at times tempestuous set of matches between the teams.
Having finally halted their losing streak, France gained momentum, beating England 15-12 in 1996, thanks to the boot of Thomas Castagnède. Les Bleus continued to excel. Victories in 1997 and 98 contributed to a Five Nations and Grand Slam double. By 2000, both teams were evolving.
There wasn't a lot of history between us then. It was an emerging generation, a new team.
You know, Rafael Ibanez, to have played against him, England, France, and goodness me, to see what it meant to him.
French flags going, bands playing, a real party atmosphere, but quite intimidating.
Like so many meetings between the two countries, this was a tense, physical affair.
You got stuck into them early doors, roughed them up a bit, especially up front. You could get the upper hand.
Unfortunately, when I got booked, it affected the team because we played with a man less.
England had grabbed the initiative, winning by 6 points.
Every time you play France, you know it's an exceptionally tough game, especially up front. You know, they're big, physical men, especially in their own home patch. You know, it was tough, but it was quite a famous victory for us.
I had just turned 22, and a week before the game I'd announced in a press conference that I didn't like the English.
A year before the 2003 World Cup, France, in Paris, outfought their arch-rivals thanks to a back-row masterclass.
All the older guys in the team were telling me that it was the most important game of the tournament, the game we mustn't lose. It's still a great memory. My first try for France.
I think the French played their best game ever. We had our challenges, but we remained calm. We were determined, aggressive, and our tactics were spot on. It was just great to win the Grand Slam, the first ever Six Nations Grand Slam. And to be the nation that won, it was phenomenal.
It was the start of a new chapter in the rivalry. The teams would face each other 4 times in 2003. The Six Nations match was won by England. There was a friendly victory apiece, and then a World Cup semi-final.
It was such a big game for us because we knew at that time, you know, we were probably the favourites going into the semi. And when we came up against the French, you know, it was that old rivalry, and it was a score to settle.
The evening of that game, you know, being in Sydney with a nighttime kickoff, and I remember the weather turning, and the one thing they don't like is bad weather, because mentally it makes it hard work for them, and they just don't like it. So I'm thinking, if I'm not happy about the weather, what must they be thinking?
The weather had been great the week before, and then on the day of the game, it didn't stop raining all day.
Despite the conditions, France made the better start.
Betson snuck over for an opportunistic try.
To score a try in the World Cup was a fantastic moment for me.
As the game progressed, tempers frayed, but England's fly half kept his focus.
Wilkinson 3 points, 3 points, 3 points.
Playing against Johnny Wilkinson has always been a big challenge for me. And I think it was the same for him against me too. In our respective careers, we've always been motivated to be the best against one another, to beat the other man, and to dominate.
With Wilkinson in relentless form, the pressure mounted on the French.
You could see them breaking, and Serge doesn't like me for this, but I just remember looking at him once on the field, and you could see almost the tears in his eyes because you could see they had nowhere to go, and it was like a slow suffocation of a team.
It's true. I was so frustrated about that tournament because of England.
The forwards really just closed the game out. You know, they starved France of any ball.
We lost control of the game, and we ended up losing it because it was clear that the English were much better than us.
My dreams were shattered. Playing in a World Cup, but losing a semi-final. I was 23 years old, and it was very difficult to accept.
It would have taken a pretty serious team to have beaten us, because you wouldn't have beaten us for effort or for will, and ultimately we broke them.
France were out, and England went on to become world champions.
We got the opportunity to win the match, and as they say, the rest is history. Hell of a 3 days afterwards.
For the next 4 years at least, France would have to face an England side who could say they were the best team in the world.
It was a period of revenge, simply because we were playing the world champions, England, and we wanted to challenge them and to get our revenge in the Six Nations.
It was the last game for the Grand Slam. It was a great memory. I'll never forget it. England were world champions, and they came to play the last game against us at the Stade de France.
We still remembered that World Cup defeat, so we're more motivated than ever before. And we beat them and won the Grand Slam.
It was a match with a great atmosphere. And in the stadium, there was a lot of hatred towards the English that day.
The following year, Yashvili was again at the heart of things, despite some unorthodox preparation.
In 2005, the night before the match at Twickenham, I was training and I broke my kicking tee. A part of it broke off.
So we went all over Richmond looking for a new one, and there were no sports stores open. So we decided to go to Twickenham instead to buy a tee, and I remember telling my friend, I think this tee will help us win.
Yashvili, scrum half. I remember him kicking a load of points when we were ahead at half-time. We lost, and he'd kicked them back into the game, basically.
We were really solid that day. We let nothing go. It wasn't a great game of rugby in terms of movement, but that win at Twickenham remains one of the best of our careers.
It was his boot, Dimitri's boot, that made us win. And I guess it's a funny story, because an Englishman helped me find that kicking tee, and Dimitri then used it to beat England. It was brilliant. The only time I won at Twickenham. And that was just an extraordinary moment for me, a great memory.
After England's World Cup victory, France had dominated their Six Nations matches. But could they maintain their edge in the 2007 World Cup, played on French soil?
To be playing France in a Rugby World Cup, semi-final again, in their home stadium, was probably as tough as it gets.
To represent the French team, and to be proud of that, and to play in a World Cup in my home country, those were just extraordinary experiences.
I remember at the toss I was thinking, and obviously knowing Raf playing at London Wasps, he wouldn't even look at me. And I thought, God, this is serious.
Yeah, they were a better team going into the tournament than we were. They were more of a steady team, and they were pretty much favourites to win the tournament.
There was a lot of pressure on us, but I think we coped well with the expectation.
Josh snuck over for an early try, and that really set us on on a strong footing, and we took the game to them, and all of a sudden the crowd quietened down and the English supports gets bigger, and you just build this momentum.
Everyone knew their role, and it was a case of, you know, the leaders came to the fore, and it was that sort of mental fortitude which got us through, and we backed ourselves in that department, if not necessarily in any other, to beat the French.
Unfortunately, we saw England get past us, and they would be the ones to play the final at the Stade de France.
You know, suddenly you have that euphoric moment at the end where you beat the French, you know, in their own backyard, when they were expecting to win and go on to the final and possibly win their first World Cup.
They beat us twice in the World Cup, and both times just before the final hurdle. So obviously, when you lose to a team like that twice in a row, you don't like them very much.
But after beating France 14-9, England would lose to South Africa in the final.
Probably when we played in the 80s and 90s, when the game was amateur, there wasn't the movement of players, so you know, you didn't really know the opposition.
Now, more so than ever, you get some French players playing in the Premiership and a lot of English guys playing in France, and you know each other's strengths and weaknesses so much.
I think that definitely reinforced the rivalry a little bit more, because it allowed my colleagues at Wasps, guys like Josh Lucy or Joe Worsley or Phil Vickery, to tease me and to make fun of France and the French.
Those 80 minutes, you play against each other. You know, you hope the other guy doesn't play well at all, misses every kick, doesn't make a tackle.
But once you cross the right line and come off after the game, it's handshakes, it's how do you do.
Touch, pause, engage.
Before the 2011 World Cup, France would win only one of their meetings, but it was significant. Les Bleus' narrow victory in 2010 helped secure a 9th Grand Slam.
You have to fight for it. It's always such a tough, tight game. And so when you beat England to win a Grand Slam, it's magnificent.
For the third time in as many World Cups, England and France faced each other in the 2011 competition in New Zealand. This time in the quarterfinals.
I remember being at the players' hotel to show support and give them encouragement, to tell them that they had to play with pride and save French honour by beating England in the quarterfinals. And for me, that was the key motivation, to stop this cycle of defeats in the World Cup against England.
We told ourselves that we were on the other side of the world to play in the World Cup, and we definitely needed to show something different, because, until that point, all the games we'd played and everything we'd done, it wasn't us. It was nothing like us.
We knew what we had to do. We had to go out there and win a game, and that's all that rugby is about.
No one was supporting us, not even the New Zealanders. We were up against the English, and we promised to finish the World Cup at 100%. We started the game powerfully, and we scored early tries.
They took their opportunities early on, and we missed ours.
1912 winners. France finally had World Cup revenge.
We knew that because it was against England, everyone would rise to the challenge, and that's what happened.
Phil Vickery also made the trip out to New Zealand, and he told me that honour had been restored. I was really proud of the French team that day.
You know, you go through those peaks and troughs, and in 03 and 07 we had some real peaks, and unfortunately in 2011 we didn't.
England and France aren't guaranteed to face each other in every World Cup. That's down to the draw. In the Six Nations, however, their next meeting is never far away.
I think playing France was just was massively about the rugby challenge.
I remember each and every game I've played against England, and that isn't the case with other nations.
It's a tough encounter when you play the French, and you know when you come off the pitch that you'll have earned a win.
There will always be this rivalry, because when we play against each other, we see the beauty of our sport and the beauty of rugby.
It was an absolute battle.